The most dangerous mistake inside a prison is believing you already know who someone is. The transport bus rolled through the final security gate of Blackstone Correctional Institution just after sunrise, its tires crunching slowly across damp pavement, while rows of razor wire glistened beneath a pale morning sky. Correctional officers waited beside the intake building, watching another routine transfer that looked no different from hundreds before it. The new arrival stepped down without speaking. Angela Brooks was 58 years old, African-American, and dressed in a plain orange prison jumpsuit that looked slightly too large for her slender frame. Her gray hair was neatly tied back, her hands remained steady, and her expression revealed neither fear nor anger. She quietly followed every instruction, carrying only a small clear property bag containing a toothbrush, a folded Bible, and a pair of reading glasses. To everyone watching, she appeared to be exactly what the paperwork described, another older inmate beginning a sentence that nobody seemed interested in discussing. Inside the housing unit, whispers spread almost immediately. A few inmates laughed at how calm the newcomer looked. Others assumed her silence meant weakness. Victor Hayes leaned against a metal railing on the second tier with several inmates gathered around him, enjoying the attention that came from deciding who would be welcomed and who would be humiliated. He smiled as Angela walked across the common area toward the intake officer. Without warning, he stepped forward and deliberately drove his knee into her face in front of dozens of inmates. The room exploded with shocked laughter, cheers, and scattered voices echoing from the concrete walls. Angela stumbled backward, caught herself against a nearby table, adjusted her glasses, and slowly stood upright. She did not shout. She did not threaten anyone. She simply looked directly at Victor with calm, unwavering eyes before quietly picking up the glasses that had fallen onto the polished floor. Victor laughed even louder, convinced he had established his authority within seconds of her arrival. Most of the correctional officers dismissed the incident as another routine display of prison intimidation, but Sergeant Thomas Keller frowned as he reviewed the intake paperwork once more. Something about the woman's composure refused to match the behavior he had expected. At the far end of the room, an older female records clerk briefly looked up from a stack of transfer files. Her eyes settled on a faded mark near Angela's wrist, and every trace of color disappeared from her face. She immediately lowered her head, pretending to continue working while quietly reaching for the office telephone beneath the counter. Across the room, Angela accepted a clean towel, thanked the intake officer with unexpected politeness, and continued processing as though nothing unusual had happened. The records clerk whispered only one sentence after the call connected. "Please tell Deputy Marshal Daniel Carter that Angela Brooks has arrived." The voice answering on the other end fell completely silent before calmly replying, "Do not let anyone move her until I get there." Angela Brooks spent her first afternoon inside Blackstone Correctional Institution exactly as though the humiliating welcome had never happened. She quietly accepted her assigned bunk, neatly folded the thin prison blanket, placed her Bible and reading glasses on the small metal shelf beside the bed, and thanked the correctional officer who handed her the standard orientation packet. The women housed nearby expected anger, fear, or at least a complaint to staff, but none ever came. Angela spoke only when someone addressed her directly, answered every question politely, and carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who had already learned that silence often revealed more than words ever could. Victor Hayes noticed her composure and found it irritating. Every inmate who entered his housing unit was expected to react, and every reaction strengthened his influence. Angela refused to give him that satisfaction. During lunch, she quietly waited in line, accepted the same tray as everyone else, and chose an empty table near the window. Several inmates deliberately filled the surrounding seats before suddenly standing and leaving together. Hoping to embarrass her, Angela simply unfolded a napkin, bowed her head for a brief moment of gratitude, and continued eating alone. Across the room, Sergeant Thomas Keller watched the entire scene without intervening. He told himself that prison culture often settled its own disputes, yet he could not ignore the strange telephone call made by the records clerk earlier that morning. He visited the administrative office and casually asked why anyone would contact a United States deputy marshal about an ordinary inmate transfer. The elderly clerk hesitated before quietly answering that she might have mistaken Angela for someone she had once seen many years earlier. Keller accepted the explanation outwardly, but uncertainty lingered in his thoughts. Nearly 100 miles away, Deputy Marshal Daniel Carter had already canceled 2 meetings after receiving the unexpected message. He sat alone inside his office surrounded by federal case files, reviewing the electronic transfer record for Angela Brooks. The file contained almost nothing beyond basic identification, sentencing information, and medical clearance. Large portions of her employment history were marked unavailable, while several earlier records appeared to have been lawfully sealed. Carter searched additional federal databases expecting routine information, but each search ended with the same restricted notification. He leaned back in his chair, studying the screen in complete silence. Someone had not merely protected Angela's past. Someone had carefully removed every ordinary path that could have explained it. Back inside the prison, evening count concluded without incident. Angela sat on the edge of her bunk reading quietly while conversations echoed throughout the housing unit. One younger inmate finally gathered enough courage to ask why she had never reacted after being humiliated in front of everyone. Angela closed her Bible, offered a gentle smile, and answered in an even voice. People usually reveal far more about themselves than they ever reveal about me. The young inmate could not understand why those simple words seemed to carry the weight of lived experience. At that same moment, Daniel Carter picked up his car keys, left the federal building, and began driving toward Blackstone Correctional Institution, convinced that the woman everyone believed they understood was the one person nobody truly knew. Deputy Marshal Daniel Carter arrived at Blackstone Correctional Institution shortly before midnight, carrying only a small case folder and the determination of someone who had spent years learning that missing information was often more important than the information available. The front desk officer recognized his federal credentials immediately and contacted the administration office, but nobody seemed prepared for his arrival. Within minutes, senior staff members gathered around the security desk, exchanging uncertain looks and quietly asking why a federal investigator would appear for an inmate transfer that had already been completed. Daniel did not answer their questions. He simply requested Angela Brooks's complete transfer records, including every document connected to her arrival. Sergeant Thomas Keller personally delivered the file, confident that nothing unusual would be found. The folder contained standard paperwork, medical approvals, transportation records, and sentencing information. At first glance, everything appeared normal. Then Daniel noticed something strange. A section labeled Previous Employment History had been marked as unavailable, but the authorization code used to restrict the information belonged to a federal classification system rather than a correctional database. Keller explained that the prison only received the documents provided to them and had no involvement in the missing details. Daniel accepted the explanation but continued reviewing the pages carefully. He had learned long ago that important answers were often hidden inside ordinary paperwork. Meanwhile, Angela remained inside the housing unit, unaware of the investigation happening around her. She spent the evening helping another inmate understand a confusing legal form and listening patiently as the woman described her concerns about an upcoming hearing. Angela never mentioned her own situation. She never asked anyone for special treatment. Her behavior confused the people around her because it did not match the image they had created after her arrival. Victor Hayes watched from a distance, expecting her confidence to eventually disappear. Instead, each passing hour made the situation more uncomfortable for him. The person he believed would be easy to intimidate seemed completely unaffected by his attempts to gain control. In the administration office, Daniel requested access to older federal archives connected to Angela's name. The system responded with a restricted clearance message. He entered additional verification information, and the results surprised him. Angela Brooks was not simply an inmate with protected records. She was connected to a federal operation that had been sealed years earlier. The details remained hidden, but one line appeared briefly before the screen locked again. Former special assignment personnel. Daniel stared at those words for several seconds. He had seen that classification only a few times during his career, and every case connected to it involved individuals trusted with responsibilities far beyond ordinary government work. He closed the file and looked toward the prison hallway where Angela was being held. For the first time since receiving the message, Daniel understood why the records clerk had reacted so strongly. The woman wearing an orange prison jumpsuit was not someone who had suddenly become important after arriving at Blackstone. She was someone whose importance had been hidden for years, and now someone had made the mistake of bringing her into a place where too many people believed they already knew her story. The next morning, Blackstone Correctional Institution felt different. Nothing visible had changed, yet the atmosphere inside the facility carried a quiet tension that even the inmates noticed. Rumors moved quickly through the housing units, and everyone had a different explanation for why a federal official had arrived during the night asking questions about one new inmate. Angela Brooks remained unaffected by the attention surrounding her. She continued following the same routine she had established since arriving, waking early, organizing her small personal space, reading quietly, and offering help whenever someone nearby needed it. To Angela, respect was never something demanded. It was something earned through consistent actions. Across the prison, Victor Hayes became increasingly frustrated because the situation was no longer unfolding the way he expected. He had built his reputation on controlling the emotions of others, but Angela refused to give him anything to use against her. She did not argue, complain, or seek approval. Her calmness made people question the confidence they once placed in him. In the administration building, Deputy Marshal Daniel Carter spent hours reviewing every available document connected to Angela's past. He discovered that several records were not missing because of simple mistakes. They had been intentionally placed behind additional security levels. Each request for information led to another restricted archive, another approval requirement, and another indication that Angela's history involved something far beyond an ordinary background check. Daniel contacted his federal office and requested a deeper review. The response came within minutes. The official on the other end of the call paused before speaking. "Are you certain you have the correct person?" Daniel looked again at the file in front of him and confirmed Angela's identity. The official lowered his voice and explained that Angela Brooks had once been connected to a highly confidential federal assignment involving national security cooperation. Details remained classified, but one fact was clear. Her records had not been protected because she was dangerous. They had been protected because her work had been considered valuable. Meanwhile, Sergeant Thomas Keller began questioning the decisions made during Angela's intake process. He reviewed security footage from the day she arrived and noticed how quickly certain staff members had dismissed the situation without asking basic questions. The incident involving Victor had been treated as routine, but Keller started wondering whether the assumptions made about Angela had influenced how everyone responded. Later that afternoon, Daniel requested a private meeting with Angela inside a secure interview room. When she entered, she immediately recognized from his expression that he already knew more than the prison staff. Daniel placed a folder on the table and quietly asked why she had never mentioned her previous federal service. Angela looked at the folder, then at him, and answered with a calm expression. "Because I came here as an inmate, not as a person who expected special treatment." Daniel studied her response carefully. After years of investigations, he recognized something unusual. Angela was not waiting for someone to rescue her. She had simply trusted that the truth would eventually find its way to the surface. And now, after years of being hidden, that truth had finally begun to return. The investigation into Angela Brooks entered a new stage when Deputy Marshal Daniel Carter returned to his office with a question he could not ignore. Why would someone go to such great lengths to hide the history of a person who had never tried to reveal it herself? He reopened every available record connected to Angela's previous federal assignment and began comparing information from different government databases. Slowly, a clearer picture appeared. Years earlier, Angela had worked in a specialized role focused on protecting witnesses, organizing sensitive information, and assisting investigations that required patience and complete trust. She had never been a public figure. She had never searched for recognition. Her entire career had been built around keeping other people's stories safe. That was exactly why so few people knew hers. Daniel discovered that Angela had requested a transfer to Blackstone Correctional Institution voluntarily. She had not arrived there by accident. She had specifically chosen a location where she believed she could complete her sentence quietly without using her former connections for personal benefit. This discovery changed the way Daniel viewed the entire situation. Angela had entered prison knowing people might judge her without understanding her past, yet she accepted that possibility because she believed fairness meant everyone should be treated according to the same rules. Back at Blackstone, rumors about Angela continued spreading. Some inmates who had previously ignored her began watching more carefully. Even Victor Hayes noticed that the atmosphere around him had changed. People who once followed his opinions started questioning whether his judgment had been correct. Angela never celebrated the shift. She continued helping others with paperwork, sharing books from the library, and encouraging younger inmates to focus on decisions that could improve their futures. Sergeant Thomas Keller observed these changes and began reviewing his own actions. He realized that he had made the same mistake as many others. He had judged Angela based on her appearance, her clothing, and her prison status instead of her character. Meanwhile, Daniel discovered one final piece of information that concerned him. A confidential review showed that Angela's classified records had not been restricted through normal procedures. Someone had requested additional protection for her files only days before her transfer to Blackstone. The timing was too precise to ignore. Someone knew she was coming. Someone understood her background. And someone wanted her identity to remain hidden. Daniel returned to the prison with a new purpose. This was no longer only about discovering who Angela Brooks had been. It was about understanding why certain people had worked so hard to make sure nobody else ever found out. When he met Angela again, he asked whether she had any idea who might want her history concealed. She remained silent for a moment before answering calmly. The truth is rarely hidden because it is meaningless. It is usually hidden because someone believes it matters. Daniel left the meeting with the same realization that had followed him since the beginning. Angela Brooks was not a person waiting for her past to save her. She was a person who had spent her entire life protecting the truth, even when nobody knew her name. Daniel Carter spent the following days investigating the unusual request that had placed additional protection around Angela Brooks's records. The more he examined the timeline, the clearer one fact became. The decision to hide her information had not been random. It had happened shortly before her arrival at Blackstone Correctional Institution, meaning someone had known exactly where she would be transferred and had taken action before she even entered the facility. Daniel requested a complete review of internal communications connected to the transfer. At first, the search appeared ordinary. Hundreds of routine messages passed between government offices every month. Then analysts discovered several unusual administrative requests that had been approved without normal explanations. None of them mentioned Angela by name, but each one was connected to the same group of officials who had handled her transfer paperwork. The pattern suggested that someone wanted control over information, not because Angela was a threat, but because her history could reveal uncomfortable questions. Inside Blackstone, Angela remained unaware of the full investigation. She continued living according to the same principles that had guided her for decades. She woke early, kept her area organized, read quietly, and helped others whenever she could. Some inmates who had originally laughed at her began seeing her differently. They noticed that she never used her past to gain influence, never demanded respect, and never treated anyone as less important than herself. Even some correctional staff began changing their opinions. Sergeant Thomas Keller was one of them. He reviewed the first incident involving Victor Hayes and realized how quickly everyone had accepted an incomplete story. They had seen an older inmate wearing an orange prison jumpsuit and assumed they understood her. They had never considered that the person standing in front of them had lived an entire life before entering those walls. Victor himself started facing questions from the people who once supported him. The confidence he displayed after Angela's arrival slowly disappeared as more inmates recognized that true strength did not come from controlling others. It came from character and self-control. Meanwhile, Daniel uncovered a hidden connection between Angela's sealed records and an old federal investigation from years earlier. Several individuals involved in that case had later gained positions connected to correctional administration. The discovery did not prove wrongdoing, but it created a new direction for the investigation. Daniel requested a confidential meeting with Angela and asked whether she believed anyone from her previous work might still be watching her. Angela looked through the small interview room window before answering. When people spend years protecting information, they sometimes forget that truth has a way of returning. Her words stayed with Daniel long after the meeting ended. He realized Angela was not afraid of what might be revealed. She was concerned about what had been hidden from everyone else. As the investigation expanded, one question became impossible to ignore. Who had decided that Angela Brooks needed to disappear from official records, and what were they hoping nobody would ever discover? The investigation reached a turning point when Daniel Carter received the complete review of the hidden administrative requests connected to Angela Brooks's transfer. The documents revealed a pattern that had remained invisible for years. Several officials had approved unusual restrictions around Angela's records, but none of them had documented a clear reason. The decisions appeared carefully planned, yet every person involved had avoided leaving a direct explanation. Daniel understood that the absence of answers was becoming an answer itself. Someone had worked hard to make sure questions would never be asked. At Blackstone Correctional Institution, Angela continued moving through her daily routine while the investigation developed around her. She attended scheduled activities, helped other inmates with paperwork, and maintained the same calm attitude that had confused people since her arrival. The biggest change was not in Angela. It was in everyone watching her. Inmates who once viewed her as an easy target now approached her with respect. Correctional officers who had ignored her background began paying attention to the way she treated others. Even Sergeant Thomas Keller admitted privately that his first impression had been completely wrong. Meanwhile, Victor Hayes found himself facing a different kind of challenge. The influence he had built through intimidation began disappearing as people recognized that confidence without respect could not last. He avoided Angela whenever possible, not because she had threatened him, but because he could no longer understand how someone could remain so composed after everything that had happened. Daniel continued following the trail of restricted records and eventually discovered a connection to a former federal supervisor named Evelyn Parker. Years earlier, Parker had been responsible for protecting the identities of several government personnel involved in sensitive operations. When Daniel contacted her, she immediately recognized Angela's name. Her response surprised him. She explained that Angela had never been someone who needed protection from others. She was someone who protected others and rarely accepted recognition for the work she completed. Parker also revealed one important detail. Before Angela entered Blackstone, someone had requested access to her old records using credentials from an office that no longer existed. That request had been hidden inside a routine system update, making it almost impossible to notice without a detailed investigation. Daniel realized the person responsible was not simply hiding Angela's past. They were searching for something connected to it. When he visited Angela again, he showed her the information he had uncovered. For the first time, she appeared genuinely surprised. She admitted that she had expected people from her past to forget her, not search for her. Daniel asked if she knew what they might be looking for. Angela looked down at the table for a moment before answering quietly. Years ago, I helped protect information that powerful people wanted to control. Sometimes the truth stays quiet until someone becomes afraid it will finally be heard. Daniel left the meeting understanding that the story was much larger than one inmate inside one prison. Angela Brooks had entered Blackstone carrying a secret she never wanted to reveal, but someone else had started a chain of events that would force that secret into the light. The only question remaining was who would be exposed. When the truth finally became impossible to hide, the investigation surrounding Angela Brooks moved beyond Blackstone Correctional Institution as Daniel Carter and his team began examining the people connected to the hidden records. Every new discovery revealed the same pattern. Someone had not been trying to protect Angela from the world. Someone had been trying to control who was allowed to know the truth about her. Daniel contacted former officials, reviewed archived communications, and compared years of administrative decisions. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged. The person who requested the unusual restrictions on Angela's records had used a chain of outdated authorizations that should have expired years earlier. The requests were subtle enough to avoid attention, but the timing revealed their purpose. They all appeared shortly before major changes involving Angela's transfer and legal status. Inside Blackstone, the impact of the investigation was becoming impossible to ignore. The same people who once judged Angela by her appearance and prison uniform now viewed her differently. Younger inmates who had laughed at her arrival began asking her for advice. Angela never reminded them of their previous behavior. She simply answered their questions and encouraged them to make better choices. Her patience became something that even her critics could not dismiss. Sergeant Thomas Keller experienced the biggest change of all. He requested a meeting with Angela and admitted that he had made assumptions before understanding the full situation. Angela listened quietly and accepted his apology without demanding anything in return. She told him that mistakes were part of being human, but refusing to learn from them was a choice. Those words stayed with Keller long after the conversation ended. Meanwhile, Daniel discovered the missing connection that finally explained why Angela's records had been targeted. Years earlier, Angela had assisted in a federal investigation involving a network of individuals who attempted to misuse confidential information for personal advantage. Her role was not public because the success of the operation depended on protecting everyone involved. The evidence suggested that one person connected to that investigation had spent years searching for information Angela had helped secure. Daniel realized that the hidden records were not about Angela's past alone. They were about someone trying to recover something that had remained protected for years. When Daniel shared this discovery with Angela, she remained calm but thoughtful. She explained that she had always known old decisions could create new consequences, but she never expected those consequences to follow her into prison. Before leaving, Daniel asked her why she had never used her former position to demand better treatment. Angela looked toward the small interview room window and answered simply, "A person's value should not change when their circumstances change." That response confirmed what Daniel had slowly come to understand. Angela Brooks was never powerful because of her old title or hidden history. She was powerful because even after losing everything that once defined her, she still chose dignity over bitterness. As the investigation prepared for its final stage, Daniel knew the remaining evidence would reveal not only who had hidden Angela's records, but why they were so determined to keep the truth buried. The final stage of the investigation began when Daniel Carter received the complete evidence report connecting the hidden records, unauthorized requests, and the individuals responsible for controlling Angela Brooks's information. The findings revealed that a former administrative official had used outdated access privileges to locate confidential files and quietly restrict information that was meant to remain protected. The goal was not to help Angela or preserve her privacy. The goal was to discover what she knew and whether old evidence connected to a previous investigation could still be found. Once the evidence was presented, federal investigators opened a formal review into the misuse of restricted systems and the decisions made by several officials who had ignored proper procedures. Inside Blackstone Correctional Institution, the atmosphere changed completely. The people who once judged Angela without understanding her story now saw her with a new level of respect. Victor Hayes, who had built his reputation on making others feel powerless, no longer received the same attention from those around him. The inmates who had followed his opinions began realizing that real influence came from character rather than fear. Angela never celebrated the change. She never reminded anyone of what they had done or demanded apologies from those who had treated her unfairly. She simply continued living according to the same values she had followed from the beginning. Sergeant Thomas Keller publicly acknowledged that his first impression of Angela had been wrong. He admitted that he had judged a person based on a prison uniform instead of taking the time to understand the individual wearing it. His honesty encouraged other staff members to examine their own assumptions about the people under their supervision. Months later, Angela completed her sentence and prepared to leave Blackstone. Daniel Carter was there when she walked through the final security gate. He asked whether she felt relieved to finally have her past recognized. Angela smiled and explained that recognition was never what she wanted. She only wanted the truth to be treated with respect. Before leaving, Daniel handed her a copy of the final investigation report. He told her that her story would now serve as an example of why every person deserved to be judged by facts rather than appearances. Angela looked at the document and quietly replied that the most important lessons were not found in files or official reports. They were found in the choices people made when nobody expected them to matter. As the vehicle carrying Angela disappeared beyond the prison entrance, Daniel remained outside for a moment reflecting on everything that had happened. The woman everyone underestimated had never needed to prove her worth. Her patience, dignity, and courage had revealed the truth without requiring her to become someone else. In the end, the biggest mistake was never underestimating Angela Brooks because of what people saw. It was forgetting that every person has a story far greater than the one others choose to believe.